The great crystal hall stretched high above the 7 council seats, each one carved from materials found on the homeworlds of the galaxy's most advanced species. Floating in space around a dead star, the council station had been the center of galactic law for over 3,000 years. Today it would witness something that had never happened before. Li Hyun stood alone in the center of the hall. The human ambassador wore his formal blue uniform, the one with Earth symbol on the shoulder. His black hair was neat, his face calm, but inside his chest, his heart beat fast. Around him sat the representatives of 7 alien species, all staring down at him with expressions that ranged from disgust to cold indifference. Speaker Veltar of the Valdari leaned forward. The tall, pale alien had large, dark eyes that could read minds, and right now those eyes burned with anger. "Human Li Hyun," the speaker said in a voice like ice, "your species stands accused of crimes against galactic peace." Li Hyun kept his back straight. Behind him, in the visitor seats, sat the other humans who had come to witness this trial. Park Jin-woo, Earth's best scientist, sat with his hands folded. Kim Da-yoon, another diplomat, watched with sad eyes. They all knew this day would come. "What are these crimes?" Li Hyun asked, though he already knew. Veltar waved one long finger, and images appeared in the air above them. Pictures of Earth's bloody history flashed by: wars, bombs, soldiers fighting in mud. Then came images of human colonies, spreading across 17 different star systems in just 200 years. "You spread like a disease," said Kethmore, representative, its crystal body ringing like a bell when it spoke. "Other species take thousands of years to expand beyond their homeworlds. You did it in decades." Park Jin-woo stood up in the visitor section. "We brought medicine that saved millions on Kepler 442c. Our farming methods feed 3 different species now. Sit down," Veltar commanded, and the scientist had no choice but to obey. The Valdari's mind powers were strong here. More images flashed overhead. Human warships, though they had never fired on any alien vessel. Human factories working at speeds that made other species nervous. Human children playing in the gardens of New Sol Colony, laughing too loud for the comfort of their alien neighbors. The chitin representative clicked its mandibles together. "They feel too much. They act without thinking. They are dangerous." "We have helped every species in this council," Kim Da-eun called out, ignoring the rule about speaking. "When the Merdai colonies were hit by the plague, human doctors worked day and night to find a cure. When the Xanthari faced the quantum storms, our engineers built the shields that saved them." The insect-like chitin made a dismissive sound. "You helped because you wanted something in return. That is how your species works." Li Hyun felt anger rise in his chest, but he pushed it down. Getting angry would only prove their point. "What do you want from us?" Veltar stood up, and the other 6 representatives stood with him. The judgment was already made. "Humanity is declared a threat to galactic peace. You have 30 solar cycles to remove all humans from space beyond your home system. Any human found outside the Sol system after this time will be considered an act of war." The words hit Li Hyun like a physical blow. 17 colonies, 8 million people, hundreds of space stations and research labs, all to be abandoned. "You can't be serious," Park Jin-woo whispered. "The decision is final." The crystalline Kethmore sang, "You will leave, and you will not return." Kim Da-yoon stood up slowly. Her voice was quiet but strong. "You're making a mistake. Humanity has flaws, yes. We fight sometimes. We feel strongly. We move fast. But we also love deeply. We sacrifice for strangers. We never give up when people need help. You're throwing away the best part of this galaxy." The Valdari speaker's dark eyes narrowed. "Your emotions make you unstable. Your violence makes you dangerous. Your expansion makes you a threat. The galaxy will be safer without you." "And what happens when you face a crisis that needs our kind of thinking?" Li Hyun asked. "What happens when you need someone who can adapt quickly or fight hard or refuse to give up?" "That will never happen," Veltar said with certainty. "We have maintained perfect peace for 3 millennia. We have no need for your chaos. Lee Hyun looked around, the hall one last time. In the far corner, he noticed a young chitin observer, smaller than the others, watching with what looked like worry. Near the back, some of the plant-like Verdani rustled their leaves in what he had learned meant deep thought. But these were not the ones making decisions. The human delegation walked out in silence. Their footsteps echoed in the crystal hall, a sound that seemed to go on forever. At the great doors, Lee Hyun turned back. "You'll regret this," he said, not in anger but in sadness. "Not because we'll make you regret it, but because you'll realize what you've lost." The doors sealed behind them with a sound like breaking glass. On the human ship heading back to Earth, Park Jin-woo stared out at the stars. 17 colonies, he said quietly. 17 worlds we turned from rocks into gardens, all to be abandoned. Kim Da-eun sat beside him. 8 million people to move. Where will they all go? Lee Hyun was already thinking about that. The Sol system was big, but not that big. They would need to build new habitats, new cities in space, new ways of living. It would be the greatest challenge humanity had ever faced. "We'll figure it out," he said. "We always do." Behind them, the council station grew smaller and smaller until it was just another point of light among the stars. But the decision made in that crystal hall would echo through the galaxy for years to come. As their ship jumped into faster-than-light travel, heading home to carry the news that would change everything, none of the humans noticed the small courier ship that detached from the station's lower levels. Inside, the young chitin observer called Kliktar was already composing a message to certain members of his species. Members who remembered what it was like before the humans came, when problems took forever to solve and new ideas were as rare as supernovas. The galaxy was about to learn what peace without progress really meant, and the humans were about to show them what their species did best: survive, adapt, and thrive, no matter what the universe threw at them. The evacuation began 3 days after the Council's verdict reached Earth. Fleet Admiral Cho Min-ho stood in the command center of Luna Station, watching the biggest movement of people in human history unfold on dozens of screens around him. Ships of every size filled the space around Earth's moon like metal clouds. "Status report," he called out to his staff. "Kepler 438b evacuation is 60% complete," reported his aide. "New Busan colony is ready to shut down their fusion reactors. Tau Ceti Research Station is packing their final equipment loads." Cho Min-ho rubbed his tired eyes. 30 solar cycles had seemed like a lot of time when the Council first announced it. Now, with only 12 cycles left, it felt impossible. 8 million people, 17 worlds, hundreds of space installations, all to be abandoned because the galaxy's older species couldn't handle having energetic neighbors. On Kepler 438b, Captain Song Yi-jun supervised the loading of the last civilian transport. The new Busan was a cargo hauler, not built for passengers, but they had stuffed in temporary living spaces wherever they could fit them. Children pressed their faces against the small windows, watching their home world shrink behind them. "Captain," her first officer said quietly, "what about the terraforming stations?" Song Yi-jun looked at the display showing the planet's surface. Hundreds of automated stations dotted the landscape, still working, still converting the hostile atmosphere into something humans could breathe. Each station represented years of work and millions of credits. "Leave them running," she decided. "Maybe whoever moves in next will appreciate what we built." The first officer looked surprised. "The Valdari monitoring station told us to shut everything down. They told us to leave the planet. They didn't tell us to destroy our work." Song Yi-jun had a stubborn streak that her crew both loved and feared. "Our terraforming systems are gifts to whoever comes next. If they're too proud to use them, that's their problem." Across the galaxy, similar scenes played out on 16 other worlds. The ocean paradise of Kepler 442c, where human children had learned to swim alongside alien sea creatures. The mining world of Wolf 359 Alpha, where human engineers had built the most efficient extraction systems in the galaxy. The research colony orbiting the neutron star in the Vega system, where human scientists had made breakthroughs in physics that would have taken other species centuries to achieve. All abandoned. All left behind. On Earth, Dr. Han Subin worked. 18-hour days in her soul laboratory. If humanity was going to be trapped in one star system, she was going to make sure they had room to grow. Her team was developing closed-loop habitat systems that could support massive populations in space. The key is redundancy, she explained to her exhausted staff. Every system needs 3 backups. Every habitat needs to be able to produce its own food, air, water, and power. We're going to build cities that can last forever. Her assistant, Dr. Kim Min-soo, looked at the plans with worried eyes. Dr. Han, these designs are incredibly ambitious. The power requirements alone. Then we'll build better power systems, Han Soo-bin said firmly. The council thinks confining us to Sol will weaken us. We're going to prove them wrong. The last human ship to leave alien space was the research vessel Sejong, commanded by Captain Yoon Tae-kyung. As they departed the Tau Ceti system, Yoon stood on the bridge looking at the research station they were leaving behind. For 5 years, that station had been his home. His team had discovered new medicines, new energy sources, new ways to clean polluted atmospheres. All of it would be left for whoever came next. Captain, his communications officer said, incoming message from the Valdari patrol ship. On screen, the pale, tall alien appeared on the main viewer. Human vessel, you are to transmit all research data to us before leaving this system. Yoon smiled, but it wasn't a friendly expression. I'm sorry, but that data belongs to the human colonial government. If you want it, you can ask them nicely. The Valdari's dark eyes narrowed. You are in violation of council orders. The council ordered us to leave. They didn't order us to give you our discoveries. Yoon gestured to his crew. Begin broadcasting, on all frequencies. Throughout the system, Yoon's voice reached every monitoring station, every patrol ship, every automated beacon. This is Captain Yoon Tae-kyung of the Sejong. We leave peacefully as demanded. But the galaxy will remember that we were here. Our work will speak for us long after we're gone. The medicines we developed will save lives. The technologies we created will solve problems. The worlds we improved will feed people for generations. You're not just losing humanity today. You're losing the future we could have built together. The transmission ended, and the Sejong jumped into hyperspace, leaving the Tau Ceti system forever. On the Valdari patrol ship, the commander stared at the empty space where the human vessel had been. Something about the human's words bothered him, though he couldn't say why. The galaxy had been peaceful for thousands of years. What need could they have for rapid innovation or quick problem-solving? Back in Sol system, the returning colonists faced a massive challenge. Luna Station, originally built for 10,000 people, now housed over 500,000, with more arriving every day. Temporary habitats sprouted like mushrooms around Earth's moon, connected by a growing web of transportation tubes and supply lines. Admiral Cho Min-ho stood in the new command center, twice as large as the old one, watching the controlled chaos of humanity's greatest exodus. Engineers worked around the clock building new living spaces. Doctors treated the stress and exhaustion of people torn from their homes. Teachers helped children understand why they had to leave the only worlds they'd ever known. Sir, one of his officers reported, we're getting requests for settlement permits from over 2 million people who want to join the outer system habitats. Cho Min-ho wasn't surprised. Throughout human history, their greatest achievements had come when they were backed into corners. The council thought they were punishing humanity by confining them to one star system. Instead, they might have just given them the motivation to turn Sol into the most advanced, most prosperous system in the galaxy. Approve them all, he ordered. If we're going to be stuck here, we might as well do it right. As the last refugee ships entered Sol system, humanity began to change. The 17 colonies had been scattered, separate, each developing in its own direction. Now, for the first time in 2 centuries, all of humanity was in one place. The sharing of knowledge, technology, and ideas accelerated beyond anything they had experienced before. The galaxy's other species watched the final human ships cross into Sol system with satisfaction. The threat was contained. Order was restored. Peace would continue as it had for millennia. They had no idea that they had just made the biggest mistake in galactic history. 2 years after the humans left, Elder Velkoth of the Merdai floated in the dying oceans of Kepler 438b and tried to understand what had gone wrong. The water around his gill slits burned with acid. Fish floated belly up in massive dead zones. The coral reefs that had been thriving just months before now looked like underwater graveyards. The aquatic species had moved to this world immediately after the humans departed, eager to claim the water-rich planet for themselves. It should have been paradise. The oceans were vast and clean. The climate was perfect, and there were no humans to crowd the waters with their noisy machines and strange ideas. But something was killing the seas. Velkoth swam slowly through the murky water to the abandoned human research station on the ocean floor. The building was still intact, its systems still running on automated power. Through the transparent aluminum windows, he could see the human equipment that had been left behind. Water purification systems, atmospheric processors, biological monitoring stations, all still working. All ignored by the Merdai colonists, who thought human technology was crude and unnecessary. The Elder accessed the station's computer system with his bioelectric field. Immediately, warning messages flashed across the screens in human script, which he had learned to read during the brief period when their species had worked together. Ocean acidification detected. Recommend immediate deployment of buffer drones. Biological balance critical. Terraforming systems require continuous monitoring and adjustment. There were hundreds of such warnings, stretching back over 2 years, all ignored because the Merdai had assumed that human technology was simple and temporary. They had not understood that the beautiful oceans they inherited were not natural. They were artificial ecosystems that required constant care and adjustment. Dr. Park Yoon-seo, a human scientist who had worked on the terraforming project, had left detailed notes in the system. Velkoth read them with growing horror. The ocean chemistry was delicate, requiring precise pH levels, mineral content, and bacterial populations. Without constant monitoring and adjustment, the entire ecosystem would collapse within 3 years. They were already into the 2nd year, and the collapse was accelerating. Velkoth swam frantically to the surface and transmitted an emergency message to the Merdai High Council. We need human assistance immediately. The oceans are dying, and we don't understand their technology well enough to save them. The response came back quickly. Impossible. The Council has forbidden all contact with humans. Find another solution. But there was no other solution. The Merdai had spent thousands of years learning to live in natural oceans, not artificial ones. The complex chemistry and biology that humans had created were beyond their expertise. Similar disasters were unfolding elsewhere in the galaxy. On the Zenthari homeworld, Queen Node Zarthes felt parts of her collective consciousness going silent. The quantum shielding that protected their hive mind had protected them for millennia, but now it was failing. Engineer Bayek Dongjin had tried to warn them about this before the humans were expelled. His research had shown that traditional quantum shielding would degrade over time due to cosmic background radiation. He had developed new algorithms that could adapt and self-repair, but the Zenthari had dismissed his work as unnecessary human complexity. Now hive nodes across 3 star systems had gone dark. For the first time in their species' history, individual Zenthari were cut off from the collective, forced to think alone. The experience was terrifying for creatures who had shared thoughts for millions of years. Some of the isolated individuals began to remember conversations with humans, discussions about independence, creativity, and the value of different perspectives. These ideas, which had once seemed alien and disturbing, now felt like lifelines in their mental isolation. In the Eudam Chitin territories, young Kliktar made a discovery that chilled his insectoid blood. While reviewing old data files in the Galactic Archive, he found research that the humans had submitted just weeks before their expulsion. It described a pattern in stellar radiation that suggested a massive wave of exotic particles would sweep through their region of the galaxy within 5 years. The humans had called it the Cascade Event, a natural phenomenon that occurred roughly every 50,000 years when radiation from the galactic core reached dangerous levels. Most organic life could survive it with proper preparation, but it required advance warning and sophisticated protective measures. Clicktar brought the data to the Chiton High Chamber, where the elders initially refused to believe it. Human science was primitive, they insisted. Human predictions were unreliable. But when 3 other species independently confirmed the calculations, panic began to set in. The exotic particle wave would arrive in less than 3 years, and none of the council species had technology capable of protecting their populations. The humans had been developing adaptive shielding and emergency protocols, but all of that research had been lost when they were expelled. On the crystal world of the Kethmore, resonance patterns that had remained stable for eons began to fluctuate. The crystalline beings who made up their society communicated through harmonic frequencies, and their entire civilization was built around precise acoustic relationships. But something was interfering with their resonance. Crystal singer Velthera stood in the great harmonic chamber, trying to tune the massive instruments that kept their society functioning. The frequencies were wrong, not by much, but enough to cause stress fractures in their crystal cities. Some of the smaller structures had already begun to crack and crumble. She accessed the galactic database and found references to human research on cosmic acoustic interference. Professor Kim Jae-won had written extensively about how exotic particles could disrupt crystalline structures, and had proposed several methods for harmonic stabilization. But the research was encrypted with quantum locks that required human neural patterns to decode. The information was there, but it might as well have been on the other side of the universe. The luminals, beings of pure energy who traveled through stellar plasma, found their traditional highways becoming increasingly dangerous. Solar flares were occurring with unprecedented frequency and intensity, disrupting the plasma currents they rode between stars. Several young luminals had been dispersed and lost while attempting routine journeys. Captain No Soo-young had commanded humanity's deep space monitoring station at Wolf 359 before the expulsion. Her research on stellar dynamics and space weather had been freely shared with all species through the galactic database. But sharing the data and understanding it were 2 different things. The luminals realized too late that human warnings about increasing stellar instability had been accurate, not alarmist. The star patterns were changing in ways that made their ancient travel methods obsolete. As the crisis deepened across the galaxy, Speaker Veltar called an emergency session of the Council. For the first time in the 3,000-year history of the institution, not all species were able to attend. The Zenthari were too fragmented to send a unified representative. The Merdai were desperately trying to save their dying colonies. The luminals had retreated to the safety of stable stars to avoid the dangerous solar weather. Those who did attend sat in uncomfortable silence as reports poured in from across the galaxy. Ecological collapses, technological failures, natural disasters that no one knew how to predict or prevent. Perhaps, suggested the young Chiton Clicktar, speaking for the first time in a council session, we should consider contacting the humans. The suggestion landed like a bomb in the crystal hall. Speaker Veltar's telepathic abilities flared with outrage. Absolutely not. We expelled them for good reason. Their chaotic nature is exactly what we don't need during a crisis. But privately, even Veltar was beginning to have doubts. The Valdari prided themselves on their ability to see the future through their telepathic powers, but even they had not foreseen the cascading failures that followed humanity's departure. Clicktar stood slowly, his insectoid legs clicking against the crystal floor. With respect, Speaker Veltar, their chaotic nature included the ability to solve problems that none of us even saw coming. Every crisis we face now, they either predicted or had already begun working on solutions. The truth hung in the air like a poison cloud. The galaxy's most advanced species, the ones who had maintained peace for 3 millennia, were helpless in the face of challenges that humans had seen coming from light years away. The weight of their mistake was beginning to settle on their shoulders like lead, and the worst part was they all knew it was only the beginning. 4 years after the humans were expelled, the Kepler 438b colony was officially declared dead. Elder Velkoth floated alone in waters that had once teemed with life, now nothing but toxic soup under alien stars. The Merdai evacuation ships, carried the last survivors away from what should have been their greatest expansion in 1,000 years. 3 other ocean worlds had followed the same pattern: initial colonization, rapid ecosystem collapse, desperate evacuation. Each time, the Merdai had tried to replicate human terraforming methods using their own technology. Each time, they failed to understand the delicate balance that human engineers had spent decades perfecting. The aquatic species that had once mocked human, primitive engineering now faced the collapse of their entire colonial empire. In the Xanthari core worlds, the fragmentation of the collective consciousness had reached critical levels. Queen Node. Zarthus existed in a state that no Xanthari had experienced in millions of years: partial isolation. Whole sections of her mind were cut off as hive nodes went dark across the galaxy. For the first time in their species' existence, individual Xanthari were learning to think independently. Some found the experience liberating. Others went insane from the isolation. The unified society that had been the foundation of Xanthari civilization was cracking apart like old pottery. Zarthis accessed the few remaining records of her conversations with engineer Bayek Dongjin, the human who had tried to warn them about quantum shielding degradation. His words echoed in her fractured consciousness. "Your collective mind is beautiful, but it's also fragile. You need backup systems, redundancies, ways for individuals to function when the network fails." She had dismissed his concerns as human paranoia. Now, as her species faced the first real descent in their recorded history, his warnings seemed prophetic. The Khitan territories buzzed with panic as the Cascade event drew closer. Less than 2 years remained before the exotic particle wave would sweep through their region of space, and they had no idea how to protect themselves. Kliktar, now promoted to senior analyst despite his young age, presented his findings to an emergency session of the High Chamber. The human data shows that the wave will disrupt all conventional shielding and overwhelm most biological systems. They estimate 90% casualties for unprepared populations. Elder Chirpthak's mandibles clicked nervously. What protective measures did they recommend? Adaptive shielding arrays, underground bunker systems, genetic modification to increase radiation resistance, and emergency evacuation protocols for non-essential personnel. Kliktar paused, his compound eyes reflecting the chamber lights. They had begun implementing these measures on their colonies before the expulsion. The silence in the chamber was deafening. The Chitan elders faced the terrible realization that humanity had been preparing to save not just themselves but their alien neighbors as well. All of that preparation had been lost when the council forced them to abandon their colonies. The crystal cities of the Kethmore were singing songs of death. Crystal singer Velthara stood among the ruins of what had been the Great Harmonic Cathedral, watching stress fractures spread through walls that had stood for 10,000 years. The resonance disruption had spread beyond just communication systems. It was literally tearing their civilization apart. She had managed to decode fragments of Professor Kim Jae-won's research, enough to understand that the acoustic interference was being caused by the same exotic particle wave that threatened the Khitan. The humans had not only predicted this crisis, but had developed harmonic compensation techniques that could have saved the crystal cities. But the full research was locked behind quantum encryption that required human neural patterns to access. The knowledge existed, tantalizingly close but completely out of reach. The luminals faced their own exodus. The energy beings who had traveled freely through stellar plasma for millions of years were now trapped near stable stars, afraid to venture into the increasingly violent space between systems. Solar storms raged with unprecedented fury, turning the plasma highways they had used since before recorded history into death traps. High energy form, Plasmata gathered with others of his kind around the neutron star Kepler 442, their plasma bodies flickering with anxiety. The young ones speak of attempting to reach the human system. He communicated through electromagnetic pulses. They say the humans predicted this stellar chaos and may have developed new travel methods. The suggestion was both desperate and humiliating. The luminals had always considered themselves the galaxy's masters of energy and space travel. The idea that humans, solid, primitive, short-lived humans, might have superior knowledge of stellar phenomena was almost impossible to accept. But the alternative was permanent isolation, cut off from the rest of the galaxy by the burning chaos that space had become. On the Valdari homeworld, Speaker Veltar stood in his private chambers, staring at intelligence reports that painted a picture of galactic collapse. His telepathic abilities, which had always given his species confidence in their decisions, now showed him nothing but fear and confusion from across the galaxy. The Valdari had prided themselves on their mental discipline and foresight. They had led the Council's decision to expel humanity, confident that they could predict and control the consequences. Now, as crisis after crisis unfolded exactly as the humans had warned, Veltar faced the possibility that his species' greatest strength, their telepathic powers, had also been their greatest weakness. They had been so certain of their mental superiority that they had dismissed human intuition, creativity, and adaptability as primitive chaos. They had seen only the surface noise of human emotions and missed the deep currents of insight and innovation beneath. Desperate to salvage something from the disaster, Veltar had authorized secret attempts to break the quantum encryption on human research databases. Teams of Valdari cryptographers and Kethmore resonance specialists had worked for months, trying to decode the locked files. They had failed completely. Human quantum encryption was unlike anything in galactic databases, adaptive, creative, almost alive in its complexity. It wasn't just a lock that required a key. It was a puzzle that required human ways of thinking to solve. The files contained solutions to every crisis the galaxy faced, but they might as well have been written in an alien language from another dimension. In a heavily shielded chamber deep beneath the Valdari capital, a group of scientists had begun the most desperate experiment in their species' history. They were attempting to recreate human neural patterns using advanced biocomputing systems, hoping to trick the quantum locks into releasing their secrets. The work was illegal under both Valdari law and Council regulations. Contact with human technology was forbidden, and attempting to replicate human consciousness bordered on species violation. But as reports of galactic collapse poured in from every corner of space, legal considerations seemed less important than survival. Dr. Kethalar, the project leader, watched bioelectric patterns flow across her screens. "We're getting closer to human baseline neural activity," she reported to her hidden team. "But something's missing. Their consciousness patterns are more complex than we anticipated." Her assistant, a young Valdari named Morthek, looked up from his instruments. "Perhaps that's why their encryption works. It's not just based on their biology. It's based on how they think. And we fundamentally think differently." The realization was as painful as it was accurate. Human consciousness wasn't just more chaotic than other species. It was more creative, more intuitive, more willing to make leaps of logic that other species couldn't follow. Their encryption was unbreakable precisely because it required human creativity to unlock. As the fourth year since the expulsion drew to a close, a new message appeared on the emergency frequencies monitored by all Council species. It was broadcast from a small chitin research station, transmitted by Clicktar against direct orders from his superiors. "This is Analyst Clicktar of the Chitin Deep Space Observatory. I'm transmitting on behalf of everyone in the galaxy who still has hope. The Cascade event will reach us in 18 months. The Merdai colonies are dead. The Zenthari collective is fragmenting. The Kethmore cities are crumbling. The Luminals are trapped. The Valdari predictions have all failed." The young Chitin's voice carried across space to monitoring stations throughout the galaxy. "We know you can hear this, humans of Sol. We know we have no right to ask. We expelled you. We called you primitive and dangerous. We dismissed your warnings and rejected your help, but please, please, we need you. Not because we deserve it, but because you're the only ones who can save us." The message ended, and space fell silent again. But somewhere in the Sol system, human receivers picked up the transmission and forwarded it to the appropriate authorities. The question now was whether humanity would answer the call for help from those who had cast them out. And if they did, whether it would be too late to prevent the greatest disaster in galactic history. The message from Clicktar reached Luna Station at 0347 hours ship time. Fleet Admiral Cho Minho was reviewing construction reports when his communications officer brought him the transmission. As he listened to the young Chitin's desperate plea, The Admiral's face showed no emotion, but inside, old wounds began to ache. Around Luna, the greatest construction project in human history neared completion. Dr. Han Subin's orbital habitats stretched in all directions, gleaming cities, in space that housed 12 million humans in comfort and safety. The closed-loop systems she had designed were so efficient that the Sol system now produced more food, energy, and manufactured goods than the 17 abandoned colonies ever had. Humanity hadn't just survived their exile, they had thrived beyond anyone's wildest dreams. In the Human Colonial Assembly, the debate over Clicktar's message raged for 3 days. Councillor Yoon Hae-jin led the isolationist faction. They made their choice 4 years ago, he argued, his voice carrying the pain of millions who had lost their homes. My daughter was born on Kepler 442c. She took her first steps in gardens we built with our own hands. Now she'll never see her birth world again because they decided we were too dangerous to exist outside Sol. The assembly chambers fell silent. Everyone there had similar stories. Homes abandoned, dreams destroyed, lives uprooted because the galaxy's elder species couldn't tolerate having energetic neighbors. But Dr. Park Yoon-seo, now in her 70s, slowly stood from her seat. The marine biologist who had designed many of the ocean worlds now dying throughout the galaxy spoke with quiet authority. I understand the anger, she said, her voice carrying across the chamber. I built those ocean ecosystems with my own research and decades of my life. I watched the Merdai dismiss my warnings as human overcaution. I know they're dying now because they thought they knew better than we did. She paused, looking around at the representatives of humanity's scattered colonies. But if we let them die out of spite, we become exactly what they said we were: dangerous. The measure of our species isn't how we treat those who welcome us, it's how we treat those who've wronged us. The debate might have continued for days, but Kim Da-yoon stepped forward. The former ambassador who had made humanity's final plea to the Council 4 years ago now served as Earth's president. Her words carried the weight of both personal pain and ultimate authority. I stood in that crystal hall and begged them to see what we really were, she said quietly. They chose fear over hope, stagnation over growth, isolation over cooperation. Now they're paying the price for that choice. She walked to the center of the chamber, where the holographic star map showed the galaxy's crisis zones in red. Nearly half the map was burning with warning lights. But we are not them. We don't abandon people to die, even people who wronged us. We'll help, not for them, but for ourselves. Because that's who we are. The vote was close, but humanity chose mercy over justice. The relief mission would launch within the month. Captain Song Yi-jun, now Admiral of the Third Fleet, led the human response. Her flagship, the new Busan, had been rebuilt and upgraded with technology developed during humanity's isolation. As they approached the dying Kepler 438b system, she couldn't help but remember leaving this same world 4 years ago. Admiral, her science officer reported, we're detecting massive ecological collapse. Ocean pH is at critical levels. Marine life is at less than 5% of baseline. Song Yi-jun nodded grimly. Elder Velkoth had sent increasingly desperate messages as his people evacuated the dying world. The proud Merdai, who had once dismissed human technology as crude, were now begging for help they didn't understand and couldn't replicate. Deploy the restoration drones, she ordered. Begin atmospheric rebalancing and contact Dr. Park Yoon-seo. Tell her we need her ocean chemistry protocols. The elderly scientist materialized as a hologram on the bridge transmitted from her laboratory on Luna. Song Yi-jun, it's good to see you again. How bad is it? Bad as you predicted it would be if they ignored your maintenance protocols. Dr. Park nodded sadly. Can we save it? Maybe. If we work around the clock for the next 6 months and if the Merdai are willing to swallow their pride and actually listen this time. Similar scenes played out across the galaxy. Engineer Baek Dong-jin led teams to repair Xanthari, quantum shielding, working with individual Xanthari who had learned to think independently during their isolation. The experience changed both species' understanding of consciousness and collective identity. Professor Kim Jae-won worked with the Kethmore to stabilize their crystal cities, his harmonic compensation techniques saving structures that had stood for millennia. The crystalline beings learned that their rigid perfection had made them fragile, while human adaptability had made them strong. Captain No Soo Young coordinated the deployment of cosmic weather monitoring stations throughout the galaxy, helping the luminals navigate the increasingly violent space between stars. The energy beings discovered that human understanding of stellar dynamics surpassed their own ancient knowledge, but the greatest challenge was the cascade event itself. With 18 months until the exotic particle wave arrived, humanity faced the biggest emergency response in galactic history. Every human ship, every engineer, every scientist worked toward a single goal: building the shields and shelters that would protect billions of alien lives. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The species that had been expelled as too dangerous was now the galaxy's only hope for survival. The wave arrived exactly when human calculations predicted it would. Across the galaxy, emergency shelters hummed with human-designed shields. Underground, bunkers protected the most vulnerable populations. Adaptive systems bent but didn't break under the exotic particle storm. When it was over, the galaxy had changed forever. The rigid civilizations that had maintained perfect order for millennia had learned that their stability was actually stagnation. The chaotic humans they had feared were the source of innovation and growth the galaxy desperately needed. In the rebuilt council chambers, now including a seat for humanity, Kliktar delivered a speech that would be remembered for generations. The young Chiton, now speaking for a reformed government that had learned the value of diverse perspectives, addressed the assembled representatives of 7 species. "We called them primitive," he said, his voice carrying across the crystal hall. "We called them dangerous. We called them unfit for galactic civilization. We were wrong about everything except one thing: they were dangerous. Dangerous to our complacency, dangerous to our stagnation, dangerous to our belief that we had achieved perfection." He paused, looking at the human delegation led by Ambassador Li Hyun, the same man who had stood alone in this chamber 5 years before. They were the threat we needed, the change we feared, and the hope we cast away. We convinced ourselves that our ancient ways were superior, that our slow, careful methods were wiser than their rapid innovation. We learned too late that wisdom, without growth, is just fossilization. The former council members sat in uncomfortable silence. The Valdari speaker Veltar, whose telepathic abilities had been humbled by human creativity. The Murdai elders, whose ocean paradise had been saved by the same technology they had once scorned. The Zenthari collective, now stronger for having learned the value of individual thought. "The question now," Kliktar continued, "is not whether they will forgive us, but whether we can forgive ourselves for nearly destroying the galaxy through our fear of change." Li Hyun stood slowly, the same man who had carried humanity's dignity through their darkest hour. When he spoke, his words carried no anger, no triumph, only the quiet strength that had always defined his species. "We didn't come back to prove. We were right," he said. "We came back because it was the right thing to do. The galaxy is stronger with all of us working together. Your wisdom, your stability, your ancient knowledge, combined with our innovation, our adaptability, our willingness to try new things." He looked around the chamber at the faces of species that had once cast humanity out. "We're not asking you to become like us. We're asking you to let us be ourselves while working toward common goals. Diversity isn't chaos. It's strength." The new galactic charter was signed that day, establishing principles of cooperation, mutual respect, and shared innovation. Humanity took their place not as conquerors or saviors, but as partners in building a better future. The galaxy would never be the same. The ancient species had learned that their perfect civilizations had been slowly dying, preserved like insects in amber. Humanity had shown them that growth required risk, that progress demanded change, and that the greatest danger wasn't chaos. It was the comfort of never having to evolve. In the years that followed, the galaxy entered an unprecedented age of discovery and growth. Human energy combined with alien wisdom created wonders that none of them could have achieved alone. New worlds were terraformed using techniques that blended human innovation with Murdai environmental knowledge. Quantum technologies advanced through cooperation between human creativity and Zenthari collective processing. Crystal cities sang with harmonies that merged human music with Kethmore resonance theory. The council had driven the humans out, fearing their capacity for change. In the end,